Welcome back to our YouTube channel here. Again, my name is Dan. I'm the Chief Financial Ninja here at Black Belt Ledgers. And this entire next series is going to be a series of about 4 videos where we learn about how to leverage some of the really important numbers and metrics within our businesses. And the first one that I want to talk about is one that has to do with making a theoretical infinite amount of money in your business, right? So let's take a look at what some of that is. 2 really important metrics in making this infinite amount of money come from these 2 ideas. The client acquisition cost. You'll hear me call this the CAC. And our average client or transaction value. We'll talk about why I'm listing these out a little separately here in just a minute. Okay. So let's take a look at what these are real quick, right? So a client acquisition cost. It's actually pretty self-explanatory in the name itself. This is how much money it takes or how much money it costs my business to get a new client. And this cost is really easy to figure out. Very simple equation, right? We have our CAC is equal to, how much I spent. So in this case, my expenses. And usually you can find this just kind of like your expenses in advertising is kind of an easy way to do this. Divided by the number of new clients. Pretty straightforward thing to do. Usually you can find your advertising expenses listed out on your profit and loss. Boom. If you have a couple different categories for like marketing expenses, maybe any promotional items associated with securing that cost, be sure to include that in there as well. So then let's take a look at this next piece here. My average client value or my average transaction value. I separated these out because, again, an average client value is the average amount of money a client spends with me in a time period. And so this is usually a little bit better when we think about the number of clients that we service or number of clients we satisfy over the span of a month. So usually my average client value is a little bit more for service-based businesses, whereas my transaction value is the average amount of money in each sale. And this is a little bit more of an appropriate model for things like a retail business, where I'm selling items or selling carts based on selling the carts kind of on an individual basis, kind of on a per transaction level. So as a general rule, here's the general takeaway. I want to keep my client acquisition costs low and my average value is pretty high. So let's say I set up a theoretical basis, right? So we'll take a look at a couple examples of how to calculate this. So again, I'm taking a look here. We'll call this example 1 in this video. I take a look at my profit and loss, right? And on my profit and loss, I see that my advertising expense came out to be $750. And I'll see that I also had promotional items for people that signed up. Maybe I gave them a free shirt or something really fun along those lines, right? So what that means is now I'm going to say, okay, that cost me $250 this month. So in this case, my total expense came out to be $1,000. And again, this is a completely theoretical example. I paid $750 for ads to get my clients in the door. And once my clients were in the door, I gave them a free shirt for showing up, right? So that means my total expense is $1,000. And over the span of the month, I attracted 5 new clients. And so I signed them up and converted, and now I can go that way, right? So there's a couple different ways that you can think about this. You can think about this in terms of a one-time expense. Hey, they showed up to my door, and in this case, you know, my one-time expense, my client acquisition cost was $200 per client, right? I take my 1,000 bucks, I divide that up over my 5 clients. That makes really easy math of my 200 bucks per client, right? So that's great. You know, depending on what size of the ticket that my client usually purchases or participates in is going to affect whether this is, quote, good or bad. And this is why we need this second metric here. So in this case, my CAC was calculated, but when I got these new clients in the door, I found that my 5 new clients spent, let's see, client 1 spent $400 with me. Client 2 spent $250. Client 3 only needed $50. Client 4 spent $300. And client 5 spent $200. Some of these clients, you can see that the one client spent a lot more, one client spent a lot less. So let's take a look at what this value adds up to, right? So my 400, 650, 50 makes 700, 1,000, 1,200, right? So in this case, I had a one-time expense, and I also had a one-time revenue from this of, what we say that was, 1,200, I think? 700, 1,000, 1,200, yeah. And so my 1,200 over my 5 new clients gives me an average value of $240 per client. And so now we can see if my client acquisition cost is a good thing or a bad thing compared against my average client value. On average, it's costing me less. So in this case, I can see my customer acquisition cost is less than my average client value. What this means is I'm making more money than I'm spending. This is a good thing. When I make more money than I spend, that means I have profits, and profits go into my pockets, and I love me some cash money. So let's take a look then. We've seen some examples of how to do some of these simple calculations. Let's look at some scenarios real quick, yeah? So I'm actually going to pull some examples from my clients here. And of course, we're going to talk about a martial arts school because I love me a martial arts school. And in this case, a martial arts school is a great example because this is mostly a service-based business with a little bit of retail. Since this is a service-based business, I usually talk to my clients about making sure they know what their average client value is. And in this particular instance, the average client value of this particular martial arts school was $167 per client. Not too shabby. So then let's take a look then. When I took a look at their P&L, so again, we'll say that this was in June of 24. When I took a look from their profit and loss, I saw that in their advertising column, they had, in the advertising column, they had about $950 spent for their advertising. And they use the promotional category to categorize the amount of free stuff they give out. And in their promotional category, they ended up spending $300. And so from all of these efforts, the results came in with a total of 7 new clients. Right? So let's take a look at this. We already know that the average client value for that month, we'll keep it same in June of 2024. We know that the average client value per month was $167. So let's take a look at what their client acquisition cost was, right? So they had $950 and $300 came out to $1,250. And they had 7 new clients. Let's see what that number comes out to. When I take $1,250 and I divide it by 7, I come out to a client acquisition cost of $170, we'll call it $179 to round up and make things nice and even, right? So now in this case, you might be saying to yourself, hey, I know that my client acquisition cost is more than the average client value. This seems like a bad thing, but the business owners and I actually celebrated because this is not a bad thing at all. And the reason is because with a martial arts school, when somebody signs up a new client, these new clients sign up for 12 months. So when it comes to calculating some of these metrics, you may see that the first month costs a little bit more to get them. But if we're looking at an average client value of $167, that's each month. So when we take a look at this, we see that an average client value in 1 year can be modeled by 167 times 12. You can also use the value of the contract. You can take a whole bunch of different approaches here. But in this case, my average client value for the span of this entire down 12 months is $2,004. And I know that my client acquisition cost was a one-time expense of $179. Originally, it looked like our client acquisition cost was more than the average client value. But this is why I talked about differentiating between a service model and a retail model, right? A retail model usually just has one purchase and that's, done and good to go. But with a service model, usually we can see that there is, a set membership lifetime. Maybe there's a certain number of months that a client agrees to working with them. In the case of this martial arts school, it ended up being 12 months, right? So we found that the client acquisition cost, actually that's not the case, right? We see that actually our client acquisition cost is a lot less than the average client value. And in this case, by a lot. We see it's $179 versus our $2,004 because we're looking at that 1 year lifetime. So there are all kinds of really different ways to think about this. On a transaction basis within a retail store, there are some additional metrics you want to take a look in, but the general idea is if you can continue to add new business every month, without having to consistently reinvest those dollars in advertising to secure them coming back, you're able to theoretically make an infinite amount of money in business. And so one of the ways that we can help track these things and track our metrics and track some additional advertising costs is by setting up a super simple lead tracker, right? So when I build a lead tracker, I like to look at the few things here. I want to look at the number of leads. If I'm working at appointment, people that are interested is kind of the way you can think about a lead. Somebody who wants to know more information about what you do because they think you're going to solve a problem for them. But when we're taking a look at some of these, we're going to see that not only are we interested in leads, we're also interested in the number of new sales. And so one extra bonus thing that you can then calculate here is your percent conversion. And this is going to give you some information about your sales process and how strong it is. If you were to take a look at your number of leads to new sales, you were to take a look at new sales divided by leads and multiply by 100. And that's going to give you the percent conversion here. So let's run an example real fast. Yeah. Let's say in June of 2024, we'll take a look at that same martial arts school. They pulled the same data for me and sent it over so I could make this video. And it turns out that in June 24, they had 54 leads. And of those 54 leads, they ended up with 7 of them converting into new clients. So I take 7 divided by 54 leads, and I multiply that by 100. And this gives me a 13% sales conversion. And what this does now is this gives me an important baseline for me to track and establish, because we can do even more things with this sales conversion route, right? I can use this to help me estimate and model the number of leads and that I'm going to need to strive for each month to make sure my processes work. So in short today, our video was taking a look at some important metrics here. I gave you an idea of our client acquisition cost. We showed how we can compare that to our average client value or our average transaction value to help us determine whether we are or are not profitable, or if our marketing efforts are or are not effective, right? And sometimes we saw that we may need to think about these on different time scales based on engagements and contracts, especially if you're a service-based business. And then lastly, we took a little bit of just a simple idea of how to create a lead tracker and start using this to calculate my sales conversion. We'll talk a little bit more next week about how to use the sales conversion to help you kind of turn your quantified money goals, kind of your specific numbers of money you need to make every month, and see if we can figure out a way to turn them into a total number of clients. But stay tuned next week. In the meantime, if you want to make sure you stay up to date with our videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel here. Again, we're here at Black Belt Ledgers. We are the Oklahoma City CFO and bookkeeping firm, and we can't wait to hear from you. Drop us a comment below with other things you may want to see in the future. This is Dan, your Chief Financial Ninja, signing off.